Ready. So welcome. Good to see you all again tonight. Let me get the prayers on. Need to do the screen share. Um, that needs to be set up. Are you doing that, Bill or Colleen? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Let's start with, as we usually do, the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, and we'll, as usual, just do this one time. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll do the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu padu dakni kyapsu chi daki chunyan gipe sanam gi dola penshir sangye drupar shok sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyan gipe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok. Let's do a short meditation as usual to focus the mind a bit and then to set our motivation of bodhicitta, which was the subject of the last few classes that we did. And last month as well as earlier this month. So again, we'll spend a little time reflecting on bodhicitta using kind of some of the elements of that technique. We won't go into it in great detail. But spend the first few minutes focusing on the breath, whatever way you prefer, and then I'll lead you in this guided meditation to set our bodhicitta motivation. So to set our motivation of bodhicitta, let's visualize that all sentient beings are surrounding us in the usual groups of the friends, close ones, to either side, immediately behind us as well, the difficult people in the space before us, and the countless other beings who are strangers surrounding those two groups, going out in all directions, this vast ocean of beings. And first, just again, having an equal attitude and equal regard for all these beings. Seeing that when we have attachment to friends, aversion towards enemies, indifference towards strangers, these block our ability to benefit those beings fully and to be dedicated to their welfare. And we can also recall how every one of these beings is just like ourselves, simply wanting to be happy, wanting to not suffer, whatever their situation is. They still have that fundamental desire. In that way, we are all equal. And then further recalling that all of these beings have been your dear, kind mother, father, beings who were very, very close to you, caring for you. They showed you incredible kindness. And now that we have this perfect human rebirth, this amazing opportunity, having met with the Mahayana Dharma, we have to repay their kindness in the most profound way by helping them to be free from suffering and leading them to true peace and happiness. So we generate those thoughts of loving kindness, this great love, this wish for all beings to attain the happiness they seek, and moreover, the desire to place them in that happiness. And accompany it with great compassion that wants all of these beings to be free from suffering and all the causes of suffering, but moreover, takes responsibility for doing that. And really feel your heart embracing all these beings, not just the friends that you're quite close to already, not just the strangers who we still can open our hearts to some degree to, but even the difficult people, the challenging people in our lives in this world, those to whom our heart hardens generally. We want to try to soften into a place of love and compassion for them. And then to cultivate this sense of kind of an altruistic intention, a special attitude that thinks, and I will do this absolutely, whatever it takes. I will help all these beings to find the happiness they seek, the freedom from suffering they desire, even if it is by myself alone. I will accomplish this for them. And this is a very brave, heroic attitude. And that leads to the query, well, and how do I do this? My current state, I can't even accomplish my own happiness, much less the happiness of others. I can't free my own self from suffering, much less free all beings from suffering. Therefore, I must become a Buddha, for in that state I then will be capable and can help all beings to the greatest degree. So bring that mind of bodhicitta very deeply into your heart, into your being, infusing our time together tonight with that attitude, that sincere wish to help all other beings to the greatest degree by developing yourself to the greatest degree. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and we'll begin. Okay, so we are working our way through the essential nectar. We have 3 classes left, including tonight's, and we're going to spend tonight mainly focused on the topic of the six perfections, which are essentially the job description of a bodhisattva, kind of what we do having cultivated bodhicitta. Let me talk a little bit about it before I go to my slides and the text. In terms of what we've been generally looking at in terms of the initial part of these teachings of the great scope, the highest level of practice in the Lamrim, are the teachings that help us to develop what we call aspirational or wishing bodhicitta. And this is what we usually call bodhicitta, right? Is this desire to become a Buddha for the sake of others. But that wish or aspiration is where it starts. Just like if you want to go to India or Nepal, some exotic place, it starts with that wish, that intention, saying, oh, I'd really like to go there. I'd like to do that. It has to kind of become something more than that for it to become reality, though, right? We have to actually engage in the activities that will get our butt over to India and actually do the things that we are thinking about doing and so on. So this is the nature of what we call engaging or practical bodhicitta. And they often conjoin that with taking the vows, the bodhisattva vows. I went through the bodhisattva vows with many, if not all of you, when we did the Exploring Buddhism course, the module that had to do with mind training and the bodhisattva vows. The bodhisattva vows we can study in advance, we can get to know them really well, so that when we finally take them, we have some confidence that we'll be able to hold them fairly well. Again, the vows are there to try to boost up our practice. They're not there as something we can instantly achieve and be pure with, but we do our best. So the idea is that these are the actual means of accomplishing the goal of bodhicitta, which is to become a Buddha. And essentially, they are wrapped around the six perfections. You might recall when we went through the secondary vows, there are 18 root downfalls that we can commit in the vows that we want to avoid. And then there are the 46 secondary transgressions. And those branch vows or secondary transgressions are actually divided into 7 groups. 6 that mirror the 6 perfections. We have a number of them for generosity, for morality, for patience, and so on. We're not going to go through all of that as part of tonight, but we'll look at the 6 perfections. And we can see that those are the main job of a bodhisattva, to take your bodhicitta and make it active in the world, to actually do the things that will help you to increase your positive potential, diminish your negative tendencies, and you do all that with bodhicitta motivation. So the 6 perfections are a bodhisattva practice. They are not done in the way that they are identified here outside of the Mahayana path. They are done together with bodhicitta. So the 7th, by the way, group of within the 46 secondary vows has to do with the idea of benefiting sentient beings, which of course is everything that the Mahayana path is about, as we saw when we talked about aspirational bodhicitta. But engaging bodhicitta is the actual going there, the actual process by which we develop our own mental continuum. We're also tonight going to talk about the 4 means of gathering disciples, they're usually called. They're the 4 means of kind of bringing people under the influence of the Dharma to the degree that we can. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail. But that's how we actually help to ripen the continuum of other beings. So we ripen our own by engaging in these practices that increase our positive potential and help diminish our negative tendencies. And then we also try to be attentive to the needs of others. Bodhisattvas generally, they do spend some of their bodhisattva career in isolation, developing their meditation and so on. But mostly bodhisattvas are out and about in the world. They are, doing the things that they need to do in relation to serving sentient beings, helping them, because that's what we're trying to cultivate, is this ideal goal of Buddhahood where you're benefiting beings all the time. So you have to do it now. You have to start now. So I think we do sometimes have this misconception in the Mahayana path that somehow, because we are working so hard on developing our minds and cultivating all these qualities on our cushion, that we're not as engaged in the world and then the problems of the world. But as we'll see, even in looking through the 6 perfections, we do have to be about helping other beings. If there's somebody there, I remember Venerable Rabina, she was teaching once about generosity. maybe the course was even on the perfection of generosity, but the idea was that when she was talking about you're walking down the street and somebody comes up to you and asks you for some change or a dollar or whatever you have, don't think that that's someone else's homeless person that's asking for money. That's your homeless person. We have to think that every being who comes into contact with us, if they've got a need, a desire, something that is they're suffering from, that's our chance to do something good for that being. And there must be some karmic connection there that they're coming into our lives. So we don't want to kind of go about our lives saying, oh, well, I'm practicing bodhicitta, I'm practicing bodhicitta, but then it doesn't enact in our actual day-to-day deeds and activities. We have to kind of bring that to life. So the six perfections encompass a lot of how we bring bodhicitta to life. Some of them are still practices we might do in isolation, particularly like the practice of perfection of concentration, perfection of wisdom, but they even should come back out into our daily life as well. Might have to spend some time in isolation, but generally the bodhisattvas, again, are very much about serving sentient beings, being out there among them, doing everything they can to benefit them. So once more, just to do the little preliminary introduction, we are in the last section of the actual practice, the third level of the stages of the path, the superior person. We went through the first part of this development of bodhicitta through the various techniques. Now we're entering into the second part, how to train in the bodhisattva's conduct when one has developed bodhicitta. So bodhicitta is kind of a prerequisite for this, but don't think it means you have to have this bodhicitta at an incredible deep level. So, with all this deep concentration supporting it, it means that when you have the thoughts of bodhicitta and are familiar enough with it, then you should be engaging in these deeds with bodhicitta. So we are going to look first at the manner of training in the general Mahayana, because the second topic under this is how to enter the Tantra vehicle, the adamantine vehicle. So this has four parts, the manner of training in the general Mahayana. This is how the Lamrim is usually set out in all the texts that I've seen, the longer texts that I've seen, certainly. How to train in the six perfections is the topic for tonight to start with. Then we'll look at how to train in the four means of attraction. They're called here in this translation, the four means of bringing people closer to the Dharma and trying to help them in terms of Dharma. Next week, we'll look more at how to meditate on quietude or calm abiding, we usually call it. Again, this is the translation term that Martin Wilson used in our text. And then the last one, how to meditate on insight. The insight, particularly realizing emptiness, the perfection of wisdom. So the perfection of concentration is the quietude. The perfection of wisdom is the insight. So all the Lamrim texts go into much more detail on those two. So we'll go into probably the teachings on the perfection of wisdom in the final class on the 30th. And then we'll finish off with Tantra that night as well. There's only a few verses on Tantra. Just as a preview, there's an introductory verse that we're going to go into in a moment. Then we'll look at the perfection of giving or generosity, morality, or sometimes called ethical discipline, patience, and then they call it here energy. We usually say joyous effort, joyous enthusiasm for our practice. And then the perfection of jhana. Jhana is, again, usually translated as concentration or meditation. And then the perfection of wisdom. So this is the plan for tonight, is to go through all of these verses. By the way, the perfections are said to be set out in terms of increasing difficulty. That's why generosity is first, is because it's said to be the easiest to practice, to actually try to let go of our miserliness that holds close to all the things that we cherish and love, and be willing to give that to others. And then we go on to increase our practice with morality, increase our practice even more with patience, joyous effort, and so on. So it is said that the latter ones are certainly much more difficult to actualize than the earlier ones, but we can practice all six. And even if I have time at the end tonight, I'll talk a little bit about how they encourage you to practice all six within each six, so that we have this very rich practice of trying to bring the six perfections to mind in everything that we do. Let's go to our text and start things out for tonight. So we're up to verse 367. Again, this is how to train in the six perfections. The introductory verse says, since I won't succeed in attaining such a Buddha's rank by simply thinking, may I attain it. That's the aspirational side of it. I must keep bodhicitta vows, strive in the advices, and enter the ocean of the Buddha son's conduct. Again, Buddha sons, it uses the term son, but it's the children of the Buddhas, the bodhisattvas. This is what we actually have to strive to attain, to engage in fully. And so this is all pointing to the engaging bodhicitta. We can't just sit back and have the wish every day and not engage in the actual activities that are going to get you there. So we have the first two verses pertaining to giving, the perfection of giving. Giving of Dharma is teaching whatever Dharma is fitting, regardless of gain or honor and so forth. Giving of safety is protecting from harm by human or non-human or by the elements. Material giving is giving all necessities, not with the hope of return or karmic results. Henceforth, I shall train with diligence in the practice of these three aspects of giving. Please inspire me so that I can do this. So let's talk a little bit about giving in general and then come back to the verses to talk about the three. Giving is the intention to give, and of course, all the acts that follow from that. But it starts with our minds. It's kind of interesting. Master Shantideva, in the very beginning of his fifth chapter of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, he goes into a little discourse about how all six perfections are perfected within our own minds, not externally. We can never be kind of satisfying the needs of all beings through our generosity. That's not the goal, is to make sure every being has what they need through our being able to give them what they need. The goal of our practice of generosity is to perfect our own minds so that we are always willing to give. We're delighted when people say the words, do you have whatever, fill in the blank. We are just, it gives us incredible joy. The Bodhisattva just lives to hear those words. So they can immediately respond with kindness to whatever it is that is asked of them. So this is the idea behind all six of these, is they are perfected from the side of our own minds, not from having calmed, or satisfied all the beings outside. Yeah, we have to do that as best as we can, but obviously that's an impossible goal. Even Jesus Christ in one of his sayings said, there will be poor always, you're always going to be dealing with the reality of people living in poverty. We can't possibly satisfy the poverty of the world through our own individual actions. Yeah, maybe as a world we could get behind it and try to remove the causes of poverty, and by being incredibly generous with our resources that we do have, especially in the developed countries. But that's not how a bodhisattva perfects generosity. They perfect generosity, particularly here, I'm talking about the generosity of material things. They do that by always having the willingness to give of their material things to whoever asks. So there are, again, these three levels of generosity, and it's interesting because they're set out in our text in the reverse order that they normally are. So the very first one, we'll go to that and just look at the line again, has to do with generosity of Dharma. Giving of Dharma is teaching whatever Dharma is fitting, regardless of gain or honor, and so forth. So this is said to be the best of the three, to give Dharma. Well, why is it the best? Because if we do give our material possessions and so on, that's great, wonderful. It helps the being in the moment to have what they need to be satisfied. But if we give them Dharma, Dharma is the answer to all suffering, to all problems, to all deficiencies and inability to have what we need and so on. Now, again, this doesn't mean that when a homeless person comes up to us and asks us for, a buck or something, that we actually say, well, giving you $1 would be fine, but I'd really rather teach you some Dharma. Why don't we have a seat here on this park bench and I'll give you some Dharma lessons? And I think that's, again, not the proper approach at all. When somebody is in need of a particular thing, we do our best to satisfy it, but we recognize that ideally what we want to do is to be able to lead people to the teachings that will help them to have the happiness that they seek. Because it is up to each of us individually, of course, to create the causes for our happiness, particularly here in regard to receiving resources, receiving the things that we need to have to live a life that's relatively comfortable so we can engage in the spiritual path. You know, as much as we might, give money every time we see somebody who is needing something, we're not necessarily changing their minds. We're not helping them to have the true causes of happiness. So this is set out first. It's kind of little quizzical because it's usually set out as the last one, and usually that's how I present it at least because that's the one we want to work up to. I might mention here that this means that certainly if we're in a position where somebody is seeking advice from us, maybe we have somebody we know who's going through a really tough time, and they come to us and they say, I just can't get past what I'm dealing with, this dilemma, this problem that I'm having. You might say to them, well, I've got some things I've learned through my teachings that I've had, that I think might be useful. Would you be interested in hearing that? And share what you can and what you're comfortable with and feel knowledgeable enough about. But that's the proper way to do it, is to always kind of seek permission in a sense before we start trying to spoon feed Dharma to people. Buddhism is not a spiritual tradition that proselytizes or tries to encourage people to become Buddhists. We're really offering what teachings we have, what knowledge we have, and what experience we have as a way of helping others to utilize those same tools. So that's maybe enough on that. The second one that is presented here is the kind of Dharma of protection. It's called here the giving of protection. Giving of safety, he calls it, is protecting from harm by human or non-humans or by the elements. Now, sometimes it can be hard for us to do this, that there are people in your neighborhood who've gone through something really difficult. Maybe they had a leak in their house, the plumbing, and they need some help to deal with that or a place to stay for the night. It's really good to protect people who are more vulnerable at particular times, or even animals, insects who are vulnerable at times. We have to do what we can to help those who are in a position where they would suffer more or be in greater danger if we didn't intervene. Again, that can be huge. It doesn't mean we have to go out and seek it out and try to do everything we can to all the, dogs that might be out on the street or cats wandering through neighborhoods that are feral and what have you. It's our job to protect them from all danger and what have you. I think that gets to be pretty challenging. But when we do have these things come into our lives, just like Venerable Rabina's, saying, this is your homeless person. Well, this is the being who's come to you for some level of protection. We're all vulnerable at various times in our life. And if someone approaches us from that vantage point and we have the resources and ability to protect them, then we should do that. Or if we don't have the ability, at least maybe try to help them to find the resources through others who can, be in a greater position to help provide safety or removing the fear of danger for them and what have you. So this is the second one. Again, it's usually second, but the first one is usually the last presented here, material giving, giving all necessities, not with the hope of return or karmic results. This is the ideal way to give. Initially, we might start our practice of giving with some understanding that this is a good way to increase our positive potential and to create the karma of having resources. Generosity is how you get resources. So if you are free with the money that you have, with the resources, material possessions, if you give them away freely, then you're creating the causes to have those. We tend to have this miserly mind that thinks, oh, if I give what I have, well, what will I have for myself? Well, it's the exact opposite. If we actually give what we have, that creates the causes for you to have more in your life, to have the resources that you seek. So this is the idea behind that one. Material giving in Tibetan Buddhism in particular, we often work with the water bowl offerings. I hope most of you do water bowl offerings every day. It's a very easy way. Now, water, of course, in our day and age is getting to be much more of a scarcity and something that, we can't always take for granted that we're going to have pure, fresh water around us. But to give even just the bit of water in water bowls on your altar every day is a wonderful practice of generosity. You're not being generous to sentient beings per se, because you're offering it on your altar, but you're trying to create the mind that is willing to give. And of course, whatever giving you do to charitable organizations or giving your time, your resources, your support to various activities that are going on in the world to help others, especially Dharma centers and what have you, like Goso Shenpen Ling there. These are wonderful ways to practice generosity. to not be so tight around our own time, resources, what have you. So this is probably enough on the first one here, the perfection of generosity. But recall on each of these perfections, they are a practice done with bodhicitta. That's why it was mentioned even with material giving. We shouldn't have this expectation that we're doing this to get something back, that there's this ulterior motive. We're doing this because we genuinely want to help beings, giving them the necessities they need, helping them to be free from danger, helping them to even have the Dharma to be able to practice. So, especially with Dharma, again, be mindful of your own limitations. You can always direct people to other people who know more than you or have, greater awareness of it. If somebody says they really have a problem, you can say, well, let me check with my teacher or check with so and see what, might be of use. You don't always have to come up with every answer for every person and their, individual dilemma. Um, but the idea is to, as much as possible, have this freedom of just giving, being delighted when somebody asks, how can I have, or can you do this for me, or whatever the case might be. Now we have some verses pertaining to morality or ethics. This starts with verse 370. This is the second perfection. Morality of vows is what they call it here. It's usually not called that. I've never really seen it called morality of vows. It's usually called the morality of abstaining from non-virtue. So it means acting in vows, not transgressing the rules of the advices of the three types of vows as one has promised. So let's talk a little bit about that one. Again, essentially what we're talking about here is avoiding any misbehavior, anything that will be a negative in terms of particularly our body and speech. But of course, for the bodhisattvas, also they want to practice good morality in their minds, avoiding any negative thoughts and criticisms and what have you of others. So the idea here is that we want to avoid what is negative, which is delineated primarily in this context, in our text, as going against your vows. Recall that there are three levels of vows. We have the pratimoksha vows that are the foundational vows that we should all feel comfortable at some point taking at least some of the lay vows, the 5 lay vows. If we take ordination and become a monk or nun, well, then of course there's a whole other set of vows that go with that. Then we have, secondly, the bodhisattva vows, which are the main ones that are being discussed here because, once more, the bodhisattva vows are the guidelines for how to enact bodhisattva behavior. As I described them earlier, they encompass all 6 perfections and all these additional practices that we want to do. And then, of course, the third is tantric vows. And tantric vows we usually don't discuss prior to people taking highest yoga tantra initiation, which is when they're granted. They're actually granted on the 3rd level of tantric practice, yoga tantra, but yoga tantra, I don't never seen an initiation into that. Usually it's highest yoga tantra or the very first level action tantra. At the first and second level, you don't take tantric vows, but you do take tantric vows for the 3rd and 4th level of tantric initiation. These are all like, we have this maybe misconception around vows, that vows are somehow like a new burden that we need to carry on our back, another load of things that we have to be attentive to. But they actually are really amazing in setting out the exact path that we need to follow. Kind of saying, well, you don't want to go there because it's going to take you off the path. You don't want to go there because it's also going to, keep you from getting where you want to go to. So the vows really kind of clearly delineate the guidelines, the borders, if you will, that we need to practice within. So they're really quite amazing in terms of helping us. So again, I've taught on the Bodhisattva vows to as part of the Exploring Buddhism course, so you can certainly look there, notes and what have you on that to remind yourself of what it is, especially if you have taken them. But even if you haven't, you want to try to abide by that behavior because you'll want to eventually take the Bodhisattva vows. That is a good part of this first level of morality, but I would include in here also abandoning the 10 non-virtues as best as you can. I went through these to some degree when we went through the section on karma. They're taught at the very first level of the stages of the path, and they are relevant all the way up to the bodhisattva path. We don't want to be engaged in harming other beings through our acts of body, speech, or mind. Again, I don't need to go through the list of those 10 non-virtues again, But anything that is harmful to others or even harmful to ourselves, we should be doing our best to refrain from, and not just, being attentive to the vows. That's a good part of this, but also just our regular behavior day in and day out. So let's go on to the second of these three types of morality. The next one is called the morality of collecting positive dharma. So while the first one is avoiding the negative ones, the transgressions and the non-virtue, here we're talking about engaging in positive dharmas, positive actions. That is to produce in one's mind stream positive dharmas like the perfections and make those produced increase. There are many things we can engage in that are virtuous, all the various practices that we have, all of the generosity we engage in, and all the other perfections that we're going into tonight. All of these are part of accumulating positive potential, changing our minds in a very positive direction. And of course, in Tibetan Buddhism, we've been taught many ways to increase our virtue through making, as I said, water bowl offerings, making mandala offerings, engaging in the seven limb practice. I mean, we have so many different practices we can do that help to create virtue, create positive potential. I forgot to mention when we got together the last time that we even had a big Buddha day last week. There was the first wheel turning day. It's kind of interesting. It was a lunar day where it fell kind of between 2 days, and so they say you could either have done it on July 9th or 10th. But anyway, on one of those days, the idea was that you would have this amazing potential to increase your merit by engaging in positive actions on that day. The next one coming up isn't until probably October, November, somewhere in there, where we'll have the descent of the Buddha from the realm of the 33. Lama Zopa Rinpoche was very keen on people doing virtuous practices on those days because the merit accumulates to a much greater degree. Uh, Whether it's 100 million or 100,000, I can't remember the number ever, but it's huge. It's better than double coupon day at the store. You actually are getting, you know, scores of merits for every positive thing that you do on those days. And that might sound like a bit of superstition, but there's some logic to all of this, that the Buddhas, these are commemorating particular days that were very auspicious and powerful in the life of the Buddha in a lunar calendar. And so every year they change generally because of the positioning of the lunar calendar against the Gregorian calendar that we use. But nonetheless, this is something to be mindful of. We shouldn't waste those opportunities, and every day, of course, we should be collecting positive potential through the various actions that we engage in. Um, so keep in mind, with motivation of bodhicitta, we can transform almost anything into a positive action, a virtuous deed. The last of these, third one, is in their 371. Their morality of helping sentient beings is benefiting beings correctly through what are called here the 11 ways of helping sentient beings. I'll talk about them in a moment and show a slide. And it says, henceforth, I shall train with diligence in the practice of these three types of morality. Please inspire me so that I can do this. So let's take a look at this one. This one is really about, once more, this idea that being a good bodhisattva isn't just, okay, I'm going to refrain from the negative stuff and engage in the positive stuff. I also really want to be quite focused on benefiting beings when they come into my sphere of influence and they are in need of something. I don't want to shut them out, turn away from them, tell them to go find somebody else who can deal with their problem. I want to be willing to do that. I want to practice benefiting others. So let me show you the traditional list that's set out in the Lam Rim in terms of these 11. I won't go into great detail, but this is, I think, primarily taken from the way they're described in the Lamrim Chenmo by Lama Tsongkhapa. The 11 ways to conduct yourself in relation to helping others are: one, helping those who suffer. Well, if you define suffer in the broadest way, that's almost everybody, but we also do mean those who are in grosser forms of suffering. Like if you see somebody who's on the side of the road and they've fallen and they're bleeding or something, you don't just walk by them. They're suffering. They are dealing with a painful situation. You do what you can to help them, to call 911 or whatever needs to be done to, benefit that being. Number two, helping those ignorant of the methods, helping them to know the methods to attain what it is that they seek. Number three, benefiting those in need of help. Number four, protecting those in danger. This becomes a bit of like that second type of generosity, giving protection. Number five, helping those afflicted with misery. Number six, helping the poverty stricken. Number seven, helping the homeless. Number eight, helping others according to their wishes. Number nine, helping those on the right path, so that they continue on the right path. And number 10, helping those on the wrong path so that they actually know what the right path is. That becomes maybe a bit of the generosity of Dharma to some degree, helping them to know what is the right thing to do. And then the 11th one we may not have yet, helping others by using miracles. They say that you can gain miraculous powers through engaging in deep states of concentration, these various clairvoyances that you can develop. But all the other ones, I think we have the capability to do. We just have to be attentive to what's going on around us and not just put our blinders on and say, well, I don't see those people and therefore it's not my problem. If those people are there in your field of vision and influence, and again, doesn't mean you have to go seeking every one of them out. This isn't a contest to see how many people you can help on the street every day. The idea is that whenever somebody is in your field of experience and they present a need, they are suffering in some way, then it does become a bit of our own responsibility to deal with that. Not that, again, we have the ability to always respond accordingly. We might not be able to completely deal with a particular person's problem or situation, but we have to do what we can. Yeah. So this is a pretty tall order. You say these, this is actually even presented as part of the Bodhisattva vows, the secondary vows within the ones related to morality. Well, we have to be kind of mindful of that and do our best to uphold that. As long as we do something, as long as we have some intention even to help out. Sometimes the situation may be too dangerous, it may be very hard for us to actually put ourselves in a more vulnerable situation. But if others are in need, we absolutely have to do something. So again, that's one level of morality. I find it quite interesting, that again, the Bodhisattva isn't just going to sit back and say, well, I'm working on my mind, I can't help you today. That's just not the way that we want to be engaging in the Bodhisattva practices. The third perfection, and by the way, morality is kind of the idea of refraining from harm. I didn't really define it. And that's probably the best way to talk about it is to not harm others, certainly, but even not to harm oneself through one's own misbehavior. Now we come to the third. We got three verses for this. This is the third perfection, the perfection of patience, which is essentially remaining undisturbed in the face of harm or suffering. So we have the first type, patience of unconcern with harming, is when all beings rise up as enemies and abuse you, on top of analyzing and not getting angry, to practice helping them in return for the harm. So the first one has to do quite specifically with beings who are harming us, situations where we are on the receiving end of harm. And of course, I've taught about this before in the course I did with all of you on the turning arrows into flowers, I think is the name I gave that one, that had to do with practicing these techniques of diffusing our anger by holding different thoughts. In Buddhism, we're never talking about suppressing our anger. Patience is not suppression. Patience isn't stuffing my anger down so that I don't express it and don't, feel it, and then just letting it fester inside me till it eventually erupts. This is not how we practice patience. Patience is where we bring to mind something else that will be an antidote at that moment. And I can't go in with the time I have tonight, I can't go into all the detail of all the various techniques that I taught as part of that course. But one of the main ones, as was pointed out in that verse, is to try to have compassion for the beings who are engaged in causing us harm. We can do that, first of all, with an understanding that this isn't a solitary action, a random thing of this person harming us. Karmically, we've created the cause for that. I know it's hard for us at that time to recognize that and to accept that, especially if this person being is causing us a lot of harm. We might think, well, what did I ever do, that would create the causes for that? Well, we don't know what we all did, the countless lifetimes that we've had. So we have to just acknowledge that this is a karmic ripening that we are experiencing. This is our own stuff. We might want to put 100% of the blame on the other person, but the reality is it's at least 50-50. I'm bringing my own karma to be the receiver of that harm, and they brought their karma into it to be the giver of that harm and are engaging in that act. And then when I become aware of the fact that they're actually doing something that's going to cause them suffering in the future, by their harming me, they're going to have to experience the same thing I'm going through. They're going to have to be the subject of harm that's inflicted upon them. Well, then it should be a cause for compassion. When we look at this karmic circle that we're involved in, I'm receiving that harm because I created that harm in the past to them. Now I'm going to harm them so that they, are experiencing harm and will inflict harm on me in the future. And it all just keeps moving in this circle. We have to kind of break out of that. So, one of the most powerful minds to hold at that time is a mind of love and compassion, a mind that sees beings through the lens of understanding that this is kind of their karma compelling them to do these things. I'd like to hold this view also, I might mention this here, that everyone's doing kind of the best that they can. You know, if they could do better, they would do better. And certain beings certainly have higher degrees of delusion and afflictions that they're under the control of, but we're all under the control of our afflictions to some degree. We just are each trying to develop more skills and awareness so that we don't succumb to that, so that we replace those non-virtuous thoughts with more wholesome, helpful thoughts. So if somebody's causing harm to us, try to hold the awareness that this is actually a being who is deserving of your compassion, not a being who you should be inflicting further harm upon. And especially if you look at it too from the point of view of this is why you're experiencing that harm is because you created the causes by getting angry and upset at them in the first place. Well, why would you do that again? Why would we inflict further harm on ourselves by continuing that circle? So there are, again, many different ways that we can look at this, but it primarily revolves around the idea of trying to have some mind of compassion. And if we can, even engage in actions that benefit those beings. If somebody's engaging in stuff that's harming us, well, the ideal thing would be to do something that is actually beneficial for them. I won't go into the whole golf ball story. You might remember the golf ball story. One of the students of Lama Zopa's in Australia was at a party, and this man was talking about this neighbor who had run into his car, and he got the car fixed, but they had this huge argument, the two of them. And he noticed that his car, after getting fixed, got keyed, and he went ahead and got it fixed, and then it got keyed again. And he's like dealing with this dilemma of I've got this neighbor now that's my complete enemy, and he keeps inflicting harm upon me. And the student of Lama Zopa said, well, I know what Lama Zopa would do in this situation. He says, go buy the nicest gift that you can for this person and take it over to them and apologize to them for any harm you've done to them. And so this guy decided he would try this. He said, it sounds crazy, but I'll try it. And he went and bought golf balls because this man was an avid golfer, and he bought like the nicest golf balls you can. I don't golf, so I don't know what those are. But anyway, he wrapped them up very nice, went over to see this neighbor who had been keying his car and after this horrible accident, and he gave it to him and apologized. And the man came over, shortly after receiving this gift and said, this is the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me. I'm so sorry for what I've done for, to you and blah, 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 blah. They became good neighbors. Kind of outrageous story, but this is what we're talking about is this kind of bodhisattva attitude. It's going to do the exact opposite. Instead of inflicting harm on those who harm us, we're going to do the opposite and actually benefit them, actually do something good for them. No, I believe in it. I think it's the way to go. So um, let's talk about the next one. The patience of willingly bearing suffering is to accept with joy being lacking in food and clothing, dwelling, and so on, unwanted things such as disease and sufferings that arise for the sake of the Dharma. So, we have a lot of suffering in our life that isn't caused by other beings necessarily, right? It's not beings inflicting harm on us, which is the first type of patience. Here, it's the patience of just the day-to-day stuff we have to deal with. the suffering of aging, the suffering of having, not getting the things that you want, the suffering of having to be separated from the things that you do like and enjoy in your life. We have a lot of sufferings that we have to go through that are just part and parcel of being a sentient being on this planet. So we get bent out of shape over these things frequently. People can get very upset and angry because their life isn't as, you know, wonderful as it was, or, things go south, what have you. We have a lot of different suffering that we experience. We lose money, we don't have our job, whatever the case might be. So we have to look at those things and actually be patient in the face of that and not develop a mind of anger, a mind that is, kind of frustrated and depressed and what have you. So this one is also a bit difficult to practice. I think the first one's harder personally, when we have people inflicting harm. But nonetheless, what are your first thoughts when suffering happens in your life, when you do get ill or something like that happens? Is it really, oh, poor me, and you start, getting all upset and really kind of go to that place? Or are you kind of opening up to the suffering of other beings? Are you seeing that as a doorway through which you can generate more compassion for others? Because we all suffer in these various ways. Every one of us gets ill. Every one of us has, days where we experience things that we don't want to. That's just part of life. So again, we can use this kind of different thoughts we introduce to not get bent out of shape when life gives you, lemons, right? They'd say, what make lemonade? Well, it's the same kind of concept here. We want to be able to use those opportunities to develop our patience and to be more aware of the suffering of others. Then verse 375, the third type of patience, the patience of certain thought about Dharma, having certainty and conviction in Dharma, is to generate heartfelt confidence and conviction about such devotion objects as the three jewels, karma and so on. We really want to be persistent and patient in developing our knowledge and realizations on the path. This is a hard path. I mean, I always talk like that. I'm not trying to discourage people. I'm actually trying to give you the ability to have this type of patience, to recognize that what we're trying to do in changing our minds with the Dharma is a monumental task. I know people get frustrated when they've been practicing the Dharma, even what seems like quite a long time. Some people here tonight in the decades, right, that you've been practicing Dharma. I remember when I first started studying Tai Chi Chuan in San Francisco, my Tai Chi instructor said, be patient with your practice of Tai Chi because we do measure our progress in terms of decades rather than years. And so doing 1 year or 2 year of Tai Chi, you'll be gaining some proficiency, but you're by no means going as deep as you can when you start measuring it over 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. Well, our Dharma practice, if we consider what we are trying to do is change our minds that have been kind of in error, not seeing things correctly, not doing things wisely since beginningless time. And we're talking about this never-ending landscape that we go back to, and that's throughout that entire duration of time, we have not had our minds in the correct place. And here we are in this lifetime trying to get it all into a couple of years of practice. Well, it's just not possible. We have to change our minds gradually, and we also have to recognize that for many of us, it's going to be many lifetimes before we become enlightened. We want to become enlightened as quickly as possible for others, but it's going to take as long as it takes. So be patient in your practice of the Dharma. Don't get frustrated. Give yourself the credit that you deserve for the things that you have changed, and always try to be mindful that the other things are going to take some time. We keep putting the effort in, and over time, we will make that change. So this is a third level of patience. It's also, again, very important. Let's go on then to what is called here energy. I tend to like the phrase joyous effort, or sometimes even perseverance is nice. The idea is that we have to have this delight in virtue and ability to really be joyous about what we're doing in our Dharma practice. Keep in mind, this is the fourth of these. So this is said to be even harder than practicing patience, which might not sound like it, but I think we're talking about a pretty high level of practice. The very first of these three types is armor-like energy or effort. It's being joyful, not sad, when one must dwell many eons in realms of woe for every sentient being, or stay a long time in samsara to realize every Buddha quality. It's kind of like an extension of the patience of Dharma, of practicing the Dharma. It's kind of maintaining that joyous mind for however long it takes. They use this term armor like. Well, the idea is that when they use a lot of military analogies in Buddhism, which is kind of strange, but India was a very warrior culture, at the time of the Buddha. They say you want to put on the armor of joyous effort, meaning that you're not going to be defeated or pierced by whatever comes up that is challenging or difficult or too much for you to take at the moment. You're going to hold the armor of this enthusiasm that says, yeah, I'm just going to keep moving through. I'm just going to keep getting back on the horse and doing what I need to do. So we want to armor ourselves in that way every day. Think that whatever I meet, may I be joyous and persevering through this, trying to get to the other side of it, trying to work with my mind through it and doing the best that I can and keep upping the ante, doing a little bit better each time. That's how we make progress, is by having this type of armor every day, feeling very enthusiastic about our Dharma practice. Then for 377, this is the joyous effort of collecting virtue. It's striving to gather in one's mind stream positive dharmas like the perfection. So we can accompany this one and the next one with the morality of engaging in gathering virtue and the morality of helping sentient beings, which we'll see in a moment. But essentially, what this means is that we have to have this enthusiasm for Dharma practice. It's really quite inspiring when we see people who live their lives this way. I'll mention one that I don't know that I'm not sure any of you know, but maybe you do. Venerable Sarah Thresher. She's been a student of Lama Zopa's, maybe even Lama Yeshe's. I think she was mainly a student of Lama Zopa's. And she's been incredible. She's living in Asia now and mostly in Nepal, but she spends like every day out going to various temples and making offerings and doing practices and recitations and all of this. She's fully dedicated her life to this enthusiasm for engaging in Dharma. And even some of us that might do some sort of amount of Dharma practice every day, various practices, meditation, trying to work with our minds and what have you, we may not have that unbridled enthusiasm. This is where you really just are so delighted to have the opportunity to sit in front of a statue of Tara that is there in Kathmandu Valley and recite all kinds of prayers and spend hours doing all these sorts of things for the benefit of beings. So again, this is something we need to work on. Every one of us, I'm sure, has some failings in terms of our own enthusiasm for the Dharma, but again, it can be changed. All we have to do is work on our minds in this way. The last one is the energy of helping sentient beings in that second part of verse 377. That's striving in those 11 ways that help them. So this is the same 11 ways that we saw for the morality of helping sentient beings. Those who are suffering and so on. We want to do the same thing, but do it with a joyous enthusiasm, kind of bring this unbridled energy and vivacity, whatever. I mean, you really want to have where you just live to practice Dharma. That is what you're about. Again, we might have a ways to go until we're there, but we at least recognize it as the goal. So the verse 378 concludes this perfection. Henceforth, I shall train with diligence in the practice of these three aspects of energy or joyous effort. Please inspire me so that I can do this. As I said, it's a little shocking that this is the fourth one. And, it seems like some of the other ones might be harder, especially patience. But I think it takes a lot to get to that place. I might mention a little verse. I want to paraphrase here. It's in the chapter on joyous effort of Master Shantideva, and you might study some of the perfections by going to that text. It's a wonderful text. Many of you have studied parts of it or maybe all of it before. But the chapter on joyous effort, chapter 7, I want to say something like the 30th verse. It has this wonderful phrase about who would ever be despondent while riding the horse of bodhicitta from life to life, going from to greater and greater happiness. And the idea is that if we really get what Dharma is about, the Dharma is about producing the causes of happiness. Well, then why wouldn't we be enthusiastic about it? We're certainly enthusiastic about enjoying the happiness that all those causes bring about, the good things we have in our lives, the comforts, and so on. Well, we have to be equally enthusiastic about the causes for that. So we would never get despondent or depressed or kind of low energy if we really got this idea that what we are about is creating the causes for going from life to life, creating more and more happiness. We are in the end the recipients of all of this. These six perfections are really about, as I said earlier, ripening our own minds, getting ourselves to our place of our greatest potential and well-being. And they involve others, obviously, because you can't do that in isolation. But this is really how we achieve greater and greater happiness, to ride this horse of bodhicitta from life to life. You know, so I don't know. I get inspired by that verse. I think it's really um, kind of what this joyous effort is all about. Let's go on then to the fifth perfection. This is here again, we use the word jhana. Jhana is usually concentration, meditative stabilization, different translations for it. It's there's three different ways that it is divided. And I'll talk about these in brief, not spend too much time on them. Previous to this, we've had just three divisions or types of each of these. Now we actually have three different ways that you could have further divisions. By nature, jhana is twofold, samsaric and then beyond samsara. So let me first dial it back and say, well, what is the concentration or jhana? It's essentially the ability of the mind to stay single-pointedly focused on an object. And that's kind of the gist of what we mean by concentration or meditative stabilization. Well, there are two kind of natures to having that type of concentration where we are single-pointedly focused. One of them is, it was called there samsaric. The word that we generally use is mundane. There's mundane concentrations that you can develop. We went through all of these in the Exploring Meditation course in Exploring Buddhism, where you can go through a process of refining your concentration using a worldly analysis. After you develop calm abiding, this very amazing state, you can go on to develop the four concentrations and then the four formless absorptions. There is a worldly way to do this, where you are looking at the coarser levels of mind and existence that are at the lower levels and the peace that you experience when you go up a level. And you go through this analysis and develop a mind of the first concentration, a mind of the second concentration, third, fourth, and then go on to the absorptions and what have you. And you keep refining your mind, but it's all done within the context of just a worldly effect, if you will. It doesn't really produce anything beyond samsara. But then, of course, there's another nature to our meditation, which is not usually called beyond. I think that was beyond worldly or beyond samsara. It's usually called supra-mundane, meaning above, beyond the mundane. We don't want to just practice mundane meditations. Supra-mundane is to actually engage in what meditations will take you out of samsara, will lead you to nirvana and enlightenment. So this is absolutely a part of the bodhisattva path. They may engage in mundane meditations to develop some skill, some aptitude for doing meditation, but then they always want to be driven towards developing supramundane meditation, which is where we actually create the causes to be free from samsara by realizing emptiness. Of course, we're going to get to that in a moment when we get to the last perfection, the perfection of wisdom. So this is one way to divide concentration, is by nature, we have mundane and supramundane. Let's go on to the next division, which is done, the words that they use are here by class, or we could say by orientation, like what are you oriented towards achieving? And here the words that are used are quietude, insight, and union. This is referring to the first one, quietude, is generally what we call calm abiding. It's the what the perfection of concentration is really to help us to achieve, is to have the mind be single pointed. We're going to look at this in more detail next week when we talk about the perfection of concentration. Quietude or calm abiding is the ability for the mind to stay single pointedly focused for as long as we wish without anything distracting it. That when moreover to have a kind of pliability, serviceability of mind and body in that state of meditation. So that's one orientation, one goal that we can engage in concentration to achieve. The next one, insight, is referring to the special insight that comes on the basis of having quietude or calm abiding. You actually are said to first develop the quietude to be able to have special insight at the degree that it would be needed. But we can even engage in some meditation to help us to have insight. Insight is essentially the perfection of wisdom. So the first one, quietude, is developing our concentration to the greatest degree. The next one is where we use our meditation to investigate the nature of reality, to actually engage in trying to realize emptiness, realize this wisdom that will help us to be free from samsara, to create the supramundane meditation that will begin the process of helping us to achieve nirvana and enlightenment. The third was called union. Well, that's because, again, I've mentioned this in other classes with all of you, you bring these two together. You have this mind that is very stable, focused, able to abide in the object as long as you wish, and you introduce with it this insight, this kind of penetrating to the nature of reality. This is a little more discursive, and so it seems like this discursiveness would keep you from being single-pointedly focused. But you can actually bring these two together. They become the union of calm abiding and special insight. This is the basis for all of our realizations. There's a wonderful passage in the Lamrim Chenmo of Lama Tsongkhapa in the second volume where he says essentially, all good qualities that we gain on the path are a product of those two minds being brought together. Meaning that essentially we talk about realizations all the time in this tradition, right? Well, what's a realization? I mean, we can say you have steps and degrees you go in gaining a realization, but what we mean by a qualified realization is something that is supported by the union of these two states of mind, or something very close to it. Lama Tsongkhapa says it can be an approximation of that. But you have to have kind of this ability for the mind to stay single pointed and then introduce the wisdom that will be allowed to penetrate because of the stability of the mind. Without the stability of the mind, you cannot penetrate deeply into the mind. It's all going to remain somewhat superficial. This is how we actually change. I like to use the phrase, it changed the fabric of your mind. You're actually going to transform your mind through these two main tools. The concentration, that is the ability to stay in that place of single pointedness, and then you introduce the wisdom that will, when you unite it with that, you can get to the root of samsara. You can actually remove that ignorance. And of course, this is how we develop other realizations too, is when we unite our investigation into those topics with a very stable, concentrated mind. Otherwise, again, you can't see the more long-lasting effects of this. We can gain a lot through study and through accumulating wisdom in a somewhat superficial way, but if it only remains on the top and superficial, then it's not going to do much good. It won't really kind of help us to move in the direction of attaining these greater levels of progress on our path, because it's just doesn't have the power behind it. So this is something to keep in mind. This second way of looking at it in terms of class or orientation is whether you're engaged in specific practice of concentration to get you to quietude or calm abiding, insight, or again, the special insight that is the perfection of wisdom, or uniting those two. The third way that we divide up concentration is called here by function. And this refers to three different ways where we can have, kind of some functional aspect of our meditative concentration. The first one, abiding in mental and physical bliss. Well, once you get to the level of calm abiding, you certainly have that. And anything beyond that, the other concentrations, absorptions, they all have that quality or function. that they help you to abide in a much more physical and mentally, kind of blissful state. That is a part of the experience of that. Um, Next week, when we talk about the various levels that you go through, I might point this out again, but I think when Venerable Rene Fussi, who's a wonderful Swiss monk in our tradition, who has done longer retreats, and he said that when he was working with getting to, there was actually an interview with Venerable Rabina did of him from Mandala magazine many years ago, and he had done his first longer retreat, but he felt like he got to maybe like the fourth fourth level, I think it was, of these 9 levels that you move towards attaining calm abiding. Again, we'll go into this next week, but he said that when you get to that fourth level, you are experiencing a bliss that you've never known. Think about all the things that you've experienced in this life to this point that have produced some pleasure, whether we talk about sexual pleasure or other sensual experiences that we've had. It's nothing compared to what you have, even at just the fourth level. The bliss that you are experiencing, the kind of freedom in the mind, the peace in the mind. We kind of think that we get some of these experiences here and there, but actually what we're having is very coarse. The mind is an incredible tool that can be developed to get to these deeper places of blissful experience. Of course, get into Tantra, and it's a whole nother level of bliss that we're working with there. But that's the first of these 3 that are by function. Then we have the jhana, the concentration that acts as a basis for qualities. Again, that we build qualities on the basis of having that. That's a different function of concentration. But as I said, pointed out just a few minutes ago, that is the basis for all of our qualities, is to unite that concentration with an ability to investigate, to analyze. And then lastly, the concentration, the jhana of benefiting sentient beings. This sounds kind of strange, but we have to bring that kind of concentrated awareness into our interactions with others as well. I mean, I certainly in the interactions I have with Lama Zopa, and I don't have any great abilities, to perceive what others are doing by any means. But you always had this impression that you're dealing with a being who's kind of their mind's in another place. You're with them and they're seeing you in a way that others don't see you because they're in that different place. There's a different level of attentive awareness that beings have that they bring to their interactions with others. And we can witness it in beings like Lama Zopa or other beings that we interact with who have these abilities. Their attention to others and their ability to be aware of what needs to happen is so much greater. That's the whole purpose. We're trying to let go of what distracts us, what keeps us from having that single pointed focus with regard to whatever we're doing. And when we're benefiting others, it's very important to have that. When I had my hernia surgery, I don't know what all transpired, but I certainly hope that my surgeon, he seemed to, and everything seemed to go well, had single pointed concentration on what he was doing while he was doing the surgery, right? You see how important that skill is even in mundane affairs. But when we're dealing with a spiritual path where our goal is to benefit all beings, well, we need to have that same concentration with regard to our focusing on others, being with others, trying to help them. So this is, I think, again, a very important one for us to be aware of and to do what we can to practice as best as we can. But obviously, it will take some time before we can kind of develop these deeper states of concentration. It's good to do our meditation every day, but we will have to at some point perhaps go into solitude and engage in wholehearted practice of meditative stabilization. So to finish off this verse in this section, it says, henceforth I shall train with diligence in the practice of these 3 aspects of jhana, by nature, by kind of orientation, what was the other phrase it used? By class, and then the third one, by function. Please inspire me so that I can do this. So this text is set out in this part as like wanting to gain the inspiration and blessings of those high beings so that we can actually accomplish each of these perfections. The last, the perfection of wisdom, again, the most difficult and yet the most essential for us to achieve any of these more long-lasting goals. The wisdom perceiving the ultimate knowing true nature. This is the first of the perfection of wisdom. That which perceives the conventional, knowing five sciences, and I'll talk about those shortly. And third, that which correctly understands how to accomplish unerringly both the benefits of migrators. I'll talk about what that means in a moment as well. So when we talk about wisdom, we're talking about the ability to discern the nature of things, essentially. There are ways that we could talk about other types of wisdom and what have you, but we're mainly focused in the perfection of wisdom on the first of these three types. It does entail having wisdom that knows the conventional, but we're mainly trying to know the ultimate. By the ultimate, we mean essentially the ultimate truth. The Buddha set out two truths, and in the final view of the Prasangika Madhyamaka point of view, the consequence middle way school, the first truth, the ultimate truth of all things, is the emptiness of inherent existence of all phenomena. This is what we're mainly trying to develop when we talk about developing special insight, developing the perfection of wisdom. So the perfection of wisdom, the Prajnaparamita Sutras are mainly about is how to cultivate an awareness that things don't have an inherent existence, that they seem to be existing from their own side, self-established, creating their own identity from their own side, but they don't have that at all. We're going to go into that in more detail 2 weeks from tonight when we have the final class, maybe towards the end of next week if we have a little more time. But this is, again, very hard to realize. But the second level of our wisdom is to also have the wisdom that knows conventionalities. That's the conventional truth that the Buddha taught. And those are all the phenomena that have an ultimate nature, that have this ultimate truth corresponding to them. You know, in the Heart Sutra, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, we say form is empty, emptiness, usually say emptiness is form. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Well, how do these two kind of fit together? Well, the conventional form, or any of the various things that exist in our conventional parlance, those things all have an ultimate truth that is a part of their being, the fact that they lack inherent existence. So any form that we point to, such as our body lacks inherent existence. We have the body and the emptiness of the body. Those two abide inextricably bound up in just the mere existence of that phenomenon. Anything that we establish conventionally, such as our body and so on, has a ultimate truth that goes with it. It's emptiness of inherent existence that has always existed, but we are blind to that reality. And the techniques that we'll look at when we get to that final class are to help us to realize the perfection of wisdom, help us to realize this truth of emptiness. And I know all of you have had teachings on that before, and hopefully have practiced meditations to try to cultivate that awareness. But awareness of the conventional is also a part of a Buddha's wisdom, because there are two truths. There are these two kind of aspects, the phenomena that exist through our conventional designation of those phenomena, and then the emptiness of inherent existence of all those specific phenomena. So we have, a pot and the emptiness of pot. We have a table and the emptiness of table. We have a person and the emptiness of person. These two exist at the same time, and there is no way of kind of having one without the other. They are bound up with what we mean by mere existence, everything together with its emptiness. So a Buddha, and actually to develop our minds into a Buddha, we have to be able to see both of those realities at the same time. They say for the Bodhisattva, of course, we are generally in this world of only seeing the conventional, only having everything appear to us, and it's appearing to us even in a false way. We develop our mind so that we eventually get to a place where we realize the ultimate truth of phenomena at a very deep way through this concentration, this union of calm abiding and special insight. When you're in that state where you're realizing it, the Bodhisattva is only knowing emptiness, ultimate truth. When they come out of meditation, well, then everything reappears, right? Because all the phenomena are still there. They just know now through their meditation that they don't exist in the way they appear. They lack that inherent existence. But this is what a bodhisattva does, is they go back and forth between these two. And they can't abide in a state where they know both sides at the same time. When you become a Buddha, you know both sides at the same time. You have that complete awareness. So this is what the bodhisattva is attempting to develop, is the perfect knowledge of both the conventional and the ultimate. The conventional here is described even in more detail as referring to everything that is kind of more consequential or important in conventional reality, which are often delineated as the five sciences. Let me share these on the screen briefly. I won't say too much about them. The wisdom perceiving the conventional is the wisdom understanding the five major fields of study, or again was called the five inner sciences, I think, the five sciences. We have grammar, medicine, art, logic, and philosophy. Philosophy being the big one, right? You know, that we have to understand the philosophical concepts within Buddhism, but obviously grammar or linguistics, knowing how to use language and so on. Medicine, the interacting of things, and Tibetan medicine, there's a lot around various kind of forces of the bile, the phlegm, and the wind, and so on. I mean, I can't speak much more to it than that. Art, logic, logic and reasoning is obviously a big part of our study. And then, of course, philosophy, as well as other fields of study. So we do have to, this is not something to also realize, is that we want to be as knowledgeable about things as we can. This is where it's not like forbidden for bodhisattvas or bodhisattva wannabes to spend time investigating things of the world and knowing enough about the world around us. You know, to have that conventional wisdom is helpful. His Holiness the Dalai Lama sits down with neurobiologists and so on, on a regular basis in these mind life conferences to be able to increase his awareness of what's going on in the field of various sciences that the Western world is exploring. We can't kind of help others if we don't have this other knowledge of the conventional world. Knowing emptiness is great. It's going to get you there in terms of helping to uh, move closer and closer to enlightenment and so on. But we also want to have a good working knowledge of the conventional world. So it makes some sense for us to invest some time in that. The last one was this wisdom that knows how to benefit others. Let's put that back on the screen. We can go through that part of the verse. It says here, that which correctly understands how to accomplish unerringly both the benefits of migrators. What does it mean, both the benefits of migrators? It means the benefit for oneself, for one's own welfare, and the benefit of others, to helping others' welfare. So every one of us has a self that we are identified as being, or the being who we are, and others. We can achieve the benefits of others. That's the whole bodhisattva path, right? To be able to accomplish our own enlightenment, and so we can benefit all sentient beings. There's two welfares involved in that way. So that which understands how to help beings to accomplish that, both the benefit for themselves and the benefit for others. In other words, how to help beings on the spiritual path, help them get to enlightenment. So again, these are all things that culminate in Buddhahood, all six of these perfections, but especially these three we just looked at for the perfection of wisdom. Henceforth, I shall train with diligence in the practice of these three aspects of wisdom. Please inspire me so that I can do this. And very briefly to go through these four means of attraction. I've got, let me actually do the slide first. I've got a slide where I'm just putting these together in a list that maybe is more commonly used. Again, Martin Wilson ended up throwing in a lot of more poetic words. Whoops, I didn't put those in here. I thought I would. Yeah, I did. I'm not going to go through that for the moment. Those were some words from Rinpoche on the six perfections. How to train the four means of attraction. These are the four. Giving material things. This is kind of how we begin to draw people towards us, attract them by giving things that they need. And Lama Zopa would be very good at that. You'd go see him for a meeting or something and he'd hand you all these various things. Sometimes he would take things that people had offered to him and very happily give them to the next person who came in the door. Speaking kind words, speaking words that, actually do help people to be drawn towards you. to think, again, not just this isn't meant to be an artifice, doing something that's just pretending to be kind to others. It's actually speaking pleasantly to others, to be genuinely interested in them and showing kind of um, a support of them in that way. And then teaching to the level of the student, recognizing that we shouldn't be throwing out concepts that are beyond the ability for that particular student or person to understand. We should try to be always attentive to what it is that they need at that time. And then fourth one, practicing what we teach. We have to exemplify what we are teaching, or it's hypocritical. Where I teach all this to others and say, oh, this is the way to live your life and da da da, and we aren't doing it ourselves. So again, this is what these four means of drawing others, having some good influence on beings around us. So we have verse 383, skillfully giving material things to attract, teaching the holy Dharma with pleasant speech, helping to enter the practice of what I have taught, helping people to adopt the teachings, to get the teachings that are appropriate for them. That's the third one. And then consistency with my teaching. Actually, again, practicing what we preach. I too conforming to practices to which I have introduced others. Otherwise, again, it becomes very hypocritical. Henceforth, I shall train correctly in the practice of these four means of attraction. Please inspire me so that I can do this. So, as I said, these are the means of ripening others in a sense. Like, okay, I want to be kind of attentive to other beings around me, trying to do what I can to have a positive influence on them. It doesn't mean, I want to say something about the second one, when we say talking pleasantly to others, this doesn't mean that every word you hear from a teacher is going to be soft and sweet and, gentle and, that view of what is kind. Sometimes teachers can be somewhat wrathful in what they are trying to get to us to do, trying to cut through some of the nonsense. I think in particular about Venerable Rabina. I don't think I'm so effective at doing this yet with my speech, but she has speech sometimes that can really cut right to exactly where you need to go. And hopefully we're ready to do that. And, from her side, she's perceiving that this is what needs to be done, just like somebody who needs to like lance a boil in order for it to stop, being so painful and such a problem for the person who has it, right? Some medical treatment is very much in this vein. We have to go through some measure of pain, having some unpleasant experience to get to the other side. Well, I talked about this earlier with the patience of practicing the Dharma, right? We do need to be persevering even with the difficult stuff. This is a hard path. I'll quote Venerable Rabina once more. I quote her quite a bit, but I'm sure you've heard this one from her that I've shared before, but she was talking and I asked her once if that was because she said someone else said this, I can't remember who it was, but it's so Venerable Rabina. She says, being a good Buddhist doesn't mean that you're kind of sitting there all calm and peaceful with just like this smile on your face. She says, being a good Buddhist means having your hands in your own shit. And that's what being a good Buddhist is like being able to look at our own stuff. And many teachers are very good at holding the mirror up so that we see our own stuff. So we go, oh yeah, I mean, look at how ridiculous I'm being. Look at how crazy my mind is. This is hard stuff, but this is the only way we're going to change is if we actually see what it is that we are doing wrong, how we are making our own misery through our deluded minds, our crazy minds, our monkey minds. So again, I want to just point that out, that don't think that, oh, well then, this means I'm just going to have to keep pampering everybody around me and thinking, that they just need to hear all these sweet things from me. I think we do have times where we do have to be somewhat assertive in terms of telling people, hey, you need to step up to the plate here. You need to actually do something different. And that may sound a bit harsh, but that may be what's needed at that time. Hopefully, we develop our own minds so that we have, again, some wisdom to know what is the best way to benefit others. What is how can we, through even our concentration, be attentive to what it is that the other person's needing at that time? Anyway, that's enough on all that. It's the end of the class, but wanted to see if there were any comments or questions, maybe one or two before we conclude. Ruth, yes, please.
I know you're surprised that I'm asking a question, but
No, we missed you the last time, 2 weeks ago. So
yeah,
please do ask a question.
I heard that. I thought, oh, am I being a pain in the butt or what? But
No, 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 it's not a pain. It's good. Questions are great. I love getting the questions because probably other people have the same questions. You're just giving them kind of voice to them. So
I'm
please.
sure I do or not. But I do try. I'm trying to put it all together. But what my question is on how do you know that you're benefiting others? And
Mhm.
I had this discussion with another, Dharma practitioner, and he actually came from being an alcoholic and AA, and he said, "Oh, well, I would give anybody anything," and I said, "Well, would you give him a, would you give another alcoholic that's trying not to drink anymore another drink?" He said, "Yeah," and I said, "Really?" I mean, to me, it was very clear. No, you wouldn't give an alcoholic alcohol. That's making it worse. But his view is like, yeah, because they wanted it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to, I'm not going to in any way put down this person or kind of say that they're wrong. I think once more, we all have to be as attentive to how to benefit others. Having the compassion that wants to benefit others is really not enough. That's why we do often talk about our path being narrowed down to these two wings, the wing of compassion and the wing of wisdom. And I think it was even Chogyam Trungpa who used the phrase idiot compassion. Idiot compassion is where we just have this mind of compassion, but it's not really looking at what needs to be done. Yeah, that would be like somebody, getting stabbed in the heart or near one or near an artery where it's like started to pierce it, and then you go, oh, I got to get that knife out of you, but you pull the knife out, and you could be causing them to bleed to death because the knife being lodged in there would be, keeping them from having this episode of, dying and what have you from the bleeding. We don't know. If you don't have the knowledge, you can be very compassionate and think you're being very compassionate in your actions and actually do things that harm. And I agree with you that in the case of someone who's an alcoholic, now I know that when you're in that phase of alcoholism where you are dealing with a high level of alcohol that needs to be maintained in the process of coming off of alcohol, well, then you do have to keep giving alcohol to alcoholics in order to get them to that place. You can't go cold turkey because it's dangerous for them and can cause all kinds of problems. So there's different times, and that again takes some wisdom, right? Someone that's why you go to a rehabilitation clinic where somebody can very skillfully, wean you off of the alcohol to get you to a place where you then aren't taking any alcohol. But of course, you wouldn't want to give them that alcohol again to, get them back to a place where they're addicted to alcohol. Well, they're always going to have some level of addiction. That's the whole point of it. But that they're then partaking in alcohol again. But I think when we start working with sentient beings from the vantage point of the Dharma, and we go, well, then, how am I going to best benefit others? It's a bit of a crapshoot. I mean, we really do still have to rely on having the motivation of compassion and having whatever insight we can have at that time. But often we're going to make mistakes. I mean, I know it as a Dharma teacher. I've had, many interactions with others that I felt were very good, and people seemed to gain something out of it. And even afterwards, I might hear, some feedback about the advice I gave being useful or whatever. And oh, wonderful. But I know I've also had times where what I said was maybe not so wonderful and maybe might have caused them a bit more suffering or a bit more difficulty. And I certainly have had situations where I felt like I needed to give something that was maybe a bit more, not maybe wrathful, because I'm not really good with wrath, but at least, something that is really challenging people. I feel like my job as a Dharma teacher isn't to make people happy by what I say. It's to help people to look at their minds, just like I want to do the same for myself, always challenge my own mind and my own thinking. But that's hard for people. And I can't tell whether somebody's ready for that or not. Is this person in front of me really ready to take a look at their own shit? Well, maybe not. Nonetheless, I might try to encourage them to do that. And I've had kind of mixed results when I've done that. So I think it's really hard. But if we keep this in mind, that we don't want to just be the one-winged bird that just keep plowing through with a compassionate attitude that doesn't really use any sort of wisdom or discernment as to what really needs to be done. So we try to incorporate more wisdom as we can, and eventually our wisdom will match up with our compassion and we'll be much, much better at being able to discern exactly what needs to happen as a compassionate response to whoever's in front of us. So I don't have a quick answer to that one. It just takes, continual dedication to the path. And certainly, not helping at times may be the wisest thing because we don't have the knowledge. I'm not a doctor, medical doctor. If somebody was bleeding on the street, I wouldn't be sitting there and trying to do all this sort of stuff to help them. I might do more damage. I might actually even cause their death by intervening in a way that is not helpful at the time. The wiser thing would be call 911, get the ambulance here, get the EMT folks that are going to know what to do, right? So I think we have to be very, kind of discerning in whatever way we can and know when we've reached our limits in terms of things we can't help with, or that we don't feel we have the proper knowledge, or that we even suspect that we might say or do something that might be more harmful, just to back off and say, well, I don't really feel qualified. But I mentioned earlier, we can also help other people to find those who are qualified. Call the 911 or do whatever you need to do to, have somebody be attentive to what's happening who can actually respond with more wisdom. So I hope that helps a little, Ruth, but yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So what I would encourage you to do over the next week is just, maybe look over these six perfections to some degree. Especially, they do say that lay people, the first four, even the fifth one to some degree, but mainly the first four are the ones that we should be primarily focused on. You know, Even the fourth one, maybe an enthusiasm for those sorts of practices: generosity, morality, patience. you know, Lay people have more opportunities to practice that because we're out in the world much more so than perhaps many monastics who are somewhat set aside from the world, living in community there. Those who do that, not all monastics do that, obviously, but they perhaps have more time for the latter ones to really engage in concentration and fine tuning their wisdom. But we should do, I mentioned I was going to talk about this, we don't have time for it, but we should try to do all of our practices with as many of the perfections as possible to kind of influence what we're doing in a more positive way. Maybe I'll start with that next time when we get together and talk about an example of that. So think about your own practice. Where do you need to put more attention in regard to these six perfections? Um, okay, let's do our dedication prayers. Let me put those on the screen and we'll conclude for tonight. Whoops, that's the chart I'm going to use next week. Had it up earlier. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And the prayers for our precious teachers, as we recite the one for His Holiness, include in this all our spiritual guides who are with us now so that they can continue to have good health, long lives, and their holy wishes fulfilled immediately. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And because we are running quite a bit later, I went about 10 minutes over, let's just make some strong prayers for the very swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, so we can benefit from his guiding presence in this world once again. Lastly, we dedicate for all the beings we're holding in our hearts so that they may be free from their suffering and find all the causes that lead them to true happiness. And may this be so for all beings through what we've done here together tonight. Okay, thank you all for being here. I will see you all next Tuesday. Good karma willing. And again, have a good week working with these six perfections and contemplating them. All right, everyone, be
Thank
well.
you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
John.
you all. Appreciate it. Very welcome. Okay.